Hi, and welcome to my channel. I'm the Gentleman Game Designer, and I am here to teach you everything that I know about designing tabletop games. In this week's video, we will explore Quantic Foundry's gamer motivation model a bit more. This is the second video I've released about this model. If you haven't watched the first video yet, you can check it out here. The Quantic Foundry gamer motivation model covers 6 major clusters of motivations. These are action, social, mastery, achievement, immersion, and creativity. Each cluster contains 2 related and somewhat interdependent motivations, for a total of 12 motivations. Each of these motivations sits on a spectrum that ranges from low to high. There's a link in the description below that allows you to download a PDF of the model from Quantic Foundry's website. Today, we're going to talk about the middle 2 clusters of motivations, the mastery and achievement clusters. Today's video is all about challenge, strategy, competition, and power. Let's get into it. The mastery and achievement clusters are where Euro-style tabletop board games really shine. The mastery cluster contains the challenge and strategy motivations. Each of these 2 motivations exists on a spectrum from low to high, and while they are related, they are each independent of one another. The challenge motivation ranges from easy fun to skill-based, whereas I prefer to think about them high chance to high skill. The strategy motivation ranges from spontaneous to contemplative, whereas I prefer to think about them the range between tactics and strategy. The challenge motivation is about skill complexity and skill improvement. It ranges from easy fun to skill-based. Easy fun has a low barrier to entry. Often, randomness is used to mitigate skill. Think of a game like Mario Party, where you get points for how well you do in the mini games, yes, but what about those dice rolls? In tabletop games, we see a similar range. On the easy fun, high chance side, we have party games like Long Shot by Chris Handy and Apples to Apples by Matthew Kirby and Mark Osterhaus. On the high skill side, we have games like the 18XX series, first devised by Francis Tresham. 18XX is a series of stock market manipulation, railroad tycoon baron board games where there is absolutely no randomness in the game. That is to say, if the players made the exact same decisions each game, the game would end in the exact same way each time. What makes high-skill games exciting and compelling to players is the challenge of figuring out what makes those games tick. High-skill games can also give players a sense of reward and fulfillment even when they do not win. Challenge is fundamentally inherent in all point-based tabletop games. By having point-based objectives, you can always present yourself with the challenge of outperforming your past performance. Consider for a moment the infamous 18XX series again. I've played so many of these games, but I have to admit to y'all, I'm pretty bad at them. There were years when I would do nothing but play these games, and I lost them again and again and again. Occasionally, when things went my way and I was playing at my best, I would win a game, which would feel really good. My friend Pete has stomped me many times in 18XX games, but the 2 times I finally beat him made chasing that high worthwhile. Some tabletop games offer challenge via game pathways which are known to the players as more difficult to achieve. Dangling more challenging pathways to victory before your players allows them to explore challenge within your game. Games like Terra Mystica and Gaia Project by Jens Drogmuller and Helga Ostertag rely heavily on faction abilities and asymmetric player powers. Choosing a specific faction known to be mechanically challenging can be its own reward for players. At one point, I got really into Terra Mystica, and I can tell you, I got so good at playing that game, I started seeking out the hard-to-play factions like the Giants. I've lost most of the games I've played as the Giants, so the few games that I did win made me feel really good because I knew it was hard. One of my favorite video game streamers on Twitch right now is GrandPoohBear. He plays hacked and modded versions of Super Mario Bros. In a subgenre called Kaizo, which means rearranged in Japanese. These games are ungodly hard. Sometimes it can take hours and even hundreds or even thousands of failed attempts to beat just one, yes, just one level. Recently, GrandPoohBear started playing a more traditional Mario ROM hack, one without the same level of challenge. And he said something that I thought was really interesting, and I think you should hear what he has to say.
It's not that non-Kaizo games aren't amazing. It's that I have too much ADHD. I crave the failure.
Did you catch that? He said, I crave the failure. That is the essence of challenge, craving the failure. The strategy spectrum is based on how far ahead the player needs to be thinking about their plan. This spectrum is about decision complexity and planning timeframes. On the low end, we have tactics, the spontaneous reaction to conditions in the game as they are right now. In video games, tactical and spontaneous decision-making accompanies most fast-paced games. You have to react to the green or red shell that your opponent just launched at you in Mario Kart, or dodge that flashbang grenade that a member of the other faction just threw into the room you're in. How quickly you can react and respond to the moment is vital to your continued success in the game. On the high end of the strategy spectrum, we have contemplative strategy, where players plan their moves well ahead of time before they can execute them. In real-time strategy games like Stellaris or the Dawn of War series, players manage and respond to the here and now while also planning around long-term strategies, which may or may not pay off until even hours later. Strategy is a vital component of all modern board games. Two fundamental mechanics of tabletop Euro-style games enable strategy. First, these kinds of games are turn-based, where players get an exclusive set period of time to take an action or series of actions that the game rules allow. Second, these games have unique action selection mechanics mediated by different mechanical devices. By action selection, I'm referring to the player having a choice of what they can do on their turn. The more open those choices are, the more potential you have for developing strategy. For example, consider a roll and move game like Monopoly by Elizabeth Magie. You don't have much choice on what you land on, and you don't have any choice but to interact with the space you land on in a restricted, pre-scripted way. Rent, buy, or auction. That's it. But in a game like Agricola by Uwe Rosenberg, you have many choices. You could go anywhere. You could do anything. Want to build some fences? There's a space for that. How about getting more livestock? There's a space for that too. Do you need some wood? Too bad, Sarah took that already. Grr, shame on you, Sarah. I needed that. In tabletop, tactics are most often encouraged by high randomness or high variance of game state between turns. For example, look at Le Havre by Uwe Rosenberg. In a game of 4 players, the game state changes so much that by the time it is your turn again, you have to reformulate your strategy. This tends to cause a lot of players to experience decision paralysis. What many people don't realize about Le Havre is that it is designed to be a tactical game, not a strategic one. You aren't supposed to have a well-planned strategy because by the time you have a chance to execute it, Uwe has already thrown several proverbial wrenches in the mix, and you have no choice but to rethink what you were previously doing. That is the point of his design. You are intended only to plan and act on your turn. This illustrates a fascinating design consideration when deciding between tactical and strategic decision-making in your games. The type of decision making available or most encouraged by the design should be obvious to the players playing the game. One of the drawbacks of Le Havre is that the mechanics of the game lend themselves to a phenomenal tactical experience, while it advertises itself to players as a strategy game. And this can lead to a confusing experience until the tactics of the game begin to click. All games require some mixture of luck and skill. If you have a high skill requirement in your game, you can make it more accessible by mitigating the skill mechanics with luck mechanics. If you have a game with too much randomness, where players don't feel like their decisions matter or have impact on the gameplay, you can make your game more skillful by mitigating randomness with player choice. Before we get into the next cluster, I want to talk to you about the ways you can help the channel. Starting a new YouTube channel is really expensive, and producing quality educational content takes a lot of time and effort. To help fund this channel, I am selling my library of games and rare trading cards, including some of the rarest cards in Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, along with a small collection of boxed Lego sets at auction. The Gentleman Game Designer auction will be held online on auctionohio.com from March 18 until April 8, 2024. Registration is free, and my auctioneer is licensed and regulated by the state of Ohio. Links to the auction are in the video description below. I hope to see you there. On April 4th, I'm going to launch a mini Kickstarter campaign to fund the development of a 12-episode storytelling and tabletop game design series that I'm going to host here on this channel. The goal of this campaign is really small, and it's just to help the channel get off the ground, and I think we can make that happen even with a small community. A link to the upcoming Kickstarter page is in the description down below. Please consider backing the campaign when it launches. Thank you. All right, now, let's get back into it. The next cluster of motivations is the achievement cluster, which contains the completion and power motivations. Each of these motivations exists on a spectrum from low to high, and while they are related, they are each independent of one another. Achievement is about seeing everything and being the best. It's about getting the best gear. It's about doing all the hard raids. It's about finding all the hidden puzzles and secrets. It's about knowing more about the game and experiencing more of it than anyone else. It's about the kudos. Speaking of which, what happened to those? I really loved kudos. The player's source of goals drives the completion motivation, which ranges from self-driven gameplay to task-oriented. The power motivation is driven by the player's need for personal growth. It's about the player's sense of progression. It's about how their engine builds over time. When we think about completion in this model, we are thinking about where the player derives their sense of completion or goals. Are they self-directed, choosing their own path, or are they on rails, working through a set of predefined tasks and challenges? In the self-driven extreme, we are looking mainly at sandbox games. Minecraft in creative mode is a great example of this. You can do anything you want. On the task-oriented side, you have JRPG games like Final Fantasy and the Dragon's Quest series. In tabletop games, self-driven gameplay is most evident in some indie role-playing games. I'm thinking of games like Our Last Best Hope by Mark Truman, or the new and exciting Trophy RPG series by the Gauntlet gaming community. Trophy is notable for its design system of rings, which allows a GM to direct the story without directly impacting how the story unfolds, and thus the players really choose their own, shall we say, outcome? Tabletop board and strategy games can also vary wildly between task-oriented and self-directed. For almost any point-based Euro game, the game's goals are almost always written in the first couple pages of the rulebook. We label this section in most rulebooks the objective, or how to win. This sets up the player's root desire or goal, but what happens when the game starts? Is the player self-directed or task-oriented? Have you ever felt lost at the start of a new game because there were so many choices that you could make? How do you know which choice is the right choice? Consider the game Lisboa by Vital Lacerda, published by Eagle Gryphon Games. Lisboa is a very complex game, with multiple game subsystems that loosely interact with one another through various mechanisms. Lisboa is great if you love highly strategic games with a wide decision space. There is just one problem. At the start of the game, Vital just drops you in the deep end. Vital's games often do this. You can do anything you want. The only problem is you can do anything you want. What should you do? So Vital and Eagle-Gryphon, being clever designers and developers, decided to add a set of cards to the game that are starting player goals. There is an A card you get to complete, which you get rewarded for, and then a B card that you must complete, and then you get rewarded for. The interesting thing about this mechanic is that these rewards are negligible, and the actions that you need to do to accomplish your A and B goals are arbitrary and really don't fit a thematic purpose. So why did Vital add them? Well, when we drop players into the deep end of the pool, it can be psychologically reassuring to them to point them in a direction where they can swim. It doesn't matter what direction you point in. What matters is that you are pointing. This is called directing the player's path. And this is why even the most open of open world games still have quest chains and quest logs and trackers to direct your path as a player. Because it turns out, not some, but most players are lost without some direction when they are new or reacclimating to a paused game. The A and B goal cards in Lisboa serve no mechanical advantage to the players or the game. They are simply Vital pointing to the pool's other side saying, "Have you tried going that way?" Power in games ranges between a flat progression and a linear or even exponential progression. For example, in a game like chess or checkers, both players have the same amount of power at the beginning of the game. In chess, power can rarely be gained. It is most often lost or taken over time. Puzzle games typically have a flat progression of power. The player doesn't advance other than in their innate ability to solve the puzzles. Dexterity games can equalize power by removing the mind's ability to control gameplay. In games like Jenga by Leslie Scott and Handy by Chris Handy, you aren't rewarded for your brain power, but for your physical ability. Sure, there is some strategy, but that's not the point of the game. Most role-playing games offer a sense of progression for the player over time. Sometimes this progression is linear, where players unlock new abilities and powers at a steady rate. Sometimes this progression is fast-paced at first and then slows down over time. And sometimes this sense of progression speeds up over time before leveling out again. The speed at which players progress in the game is something I call ramp. In a tabletop board game, this is how quickly a player can build their engine of their strategy. It's how fast they can grow their family. It's how much money they can generate by operating their company. Ramp is about how fast players can snowball their sense of progression by accumulating small actions that build to big results. Here's a question for you. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is it better to design a game to end right before a player reaches their peak progression, or right after they reach it? Why? What are the drawbacks and benefits of each approach? Let me ask you this. Have you ever played a game that ended a little bit too early? How about a game that dragged on for way too long? Why did they feel that way? And what could have changed in the mechanics of those games to make it feel better? These are all questions of progression. Mastery is about the mind and body's ability to overcome challenge, whereas achievement is about recognition and power. Both are potent clusters of motivations that drive players forward in the game. In next week's video, we will cover immersion and creativity. To be notified when that video is released, please consider signing up for the newsletter linked in the description below. Also, please consider joining our Discord community and like and share this video with everyone you know. Thanks for hanging out until the end. Thank you to my paid patrons, Mike, Kathleen, and Christian. Your support means everything to me. I also want to give a big shout out to everyone who has joined our growing Discord community. Thank you for being here and helping make this community what it is. Good luck. have fun, go make some games.